7 o'clock. I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Capitola Planning Commission. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Smith? Here. Commissioner Story?
Here.
Commissioner Welch?
Here.
Commissioner Westman?
Here.
Chairperson Newman?
Here. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This meeting is cablecast live on Charter Communications, Cable TV Channel 8, and AT&T UVerse Channel 99. It is being recorded to be replayed on the following Monday and Friday at 1 p.m. on Charter Channel 71 and Comcast Channel 25. Meetings can also be viewed from the city's website, www.cityofcapitola.org, and our technician tonight is Lynn Dutton. So that takes us to our agenda. First item is new business and the election of a chair and vice chair for the coming year. So do I have a motion?
I would move that Sam be our chairperson and that Susan be our vice chairperson, if I can make that motion. And
A little more formally, that would be Sam Story.
Sorry.
Susan Westman.
Sorry about that.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Well, before you take the vote on that, first of all, I want to say I'm very honored and I'm happy to serve as the chair. But being the junior member of the commission, I did want to make sure that...
We feel you have the background and experience to handle this job.
Okay, understood. Well, with that, please proceed with the vote.
Okay. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, none, so that's unanimous. I will turn over the chairmanship to Commissioner Story. I want to thank all the commissioners for a great year and for participating so actively and intelligently in the meetings that we had. Thank you.
Well, we appreciated the job that you did. And you made us make clear motions, and sometimes they weren't too clear.
Okay, well, you want to change chairs, or you want to do it?
Sure, let's change.
It sneaks
Now,
up
one
on
of
you.
your responsibilities at this end, though, Ed, is to give us some water.
Okay.
Chairman to water boy.
Yeah.
Well, that was an unexpected honor and privilege to be nominated and voted in as the chair of the Planning Commission. Thank you, commissioners. And also, Ed, I do want to thank you. I mean, with my year being on the commission, I thought, you were capable, ran a good meeting, and certainly appreciate your depth of knowledge on commission matters and issues, and I've learned a lot from you. So hopefully I can maintain your stellar work record here. Thank you. With that, let's move on then to commission appointments. We have the Art and Cultural Commission up next, and I'm the current Planning Commissioner appointment to the Art and Cultural Commission, but I'm happy to, if there's nominations or anyone else.
Are you interested in continuing?
Oh, absolutely, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Then I nominate Commissioner Story for the Arts and Cultural Council.
I'll second that.
And there's any other nominations? Seeing none, I'll close the nominations. We'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? The motion passes unanimously. So then we'll move on to the Traffic and Parking Commission. TJ, you're currently our representative there.
I would be more than happy to allow somebody else the duty if they would love to jump in there.
But I hear you do such
Oh, I'm sure you do.
a wonderful
Yeah.
job.
I'm going to move that Commissioner Welch continue in that role.
This is a
I'll
punishment.
second that.
So the motion and a second to have Commissioner Welch be the Planning Commission appointment to the Traffic and Parking Commission. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Next on the agenda is oral communications. And the first item are additions and deletions to the agenda. Do commissioners have any additions or deletions, and deletions to the agenda?
No, just to let you know, I have to recuse myself for the last item, 1810 Wharf Road, because I live right across the creek from it, so I will be leaving the meeting at that point.
Okay, yeah, that's,
So perhaps if the director's report has anything important. Okay.
And then also, under the consent calendar, I'll have to recuse myself due to proximity of the El Salto, so I don't know if we want to split that up when we look at the consent calendar.
well, yeah, maybe when we get to the consent calendar, we can do that, because I have that same issue as well, because of conflict based on proximity. We will split up those two consent items when we get to that agenda item. So, does staff have any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Staff has no changes.
Okay. Anyone in the public wish to add or delete an item from the agenda? And welcome everyone on this rainy evening, to be here tonight. The next item is public comments, and this is opportunity for members of the public to address the commission on items that are not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone that would like to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public comments and we'll move on to commission comments. Anyone?
I have one.
Yes.
I attended the last week's city council meeting when they had the presentations on the rail right-of-way and considering whether or not to do the rail trail option or trail-only option. And I thought it was really nice to hear from both sides. And if you didn't get a chance to be at that meeting, it's really worthwhile to go back and listen to the presentation that was made by both sides. I think it's going to be a big issue in our county, and we all need to get educated about it.
I only have one comment, and that is next Wednesday evening, there is a discussion about the mall property. It'll be at Jade Street Park at 6 o'clock, so if you're interested in the mall and what's going to go on with the mall, it'll be a good opportunity for the public to come out and be heard.
Any other comments from commissioners? Hearing none, we'll move on to staff comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take liberty here to address a couple items I would normally reserve for the director's report, given the recusals we have. Next week, we are hoping to have the final adoption of the zoning code at the city council meeting. Last week, they did introduce the first reading and pass that unanimously. So we will hear the item, and at the conclusion of the hearing, we're going to have a cake and recognize everybody's hard work on it. We would very much like to see the commissioners there, but we understand it is another late evening, so we'll understand if you don't show up. But certainly feel free to attend if you'd like to come and join us at the end of next Thursday's council meeting. Secondarily, in light of being on the cusp of adopting a new zoning code, I've been starting to work on a cleanup of the general plan. I've got a number of amendments I would like to propose. Most of them are going to be land use map changes to align with the new zoning map. There's a couple of other minor items. We've talked in the past about the bonus floor area ratio on the hotel site in the village. There's some changes to the parks that we had since the general plan was adopted. McGregor is up. We've since got a planned park at Rispin. A couple of minor things, but I did want to invite you to take a look. Let me know if there's anything else you would like to address. The plan will be to present you with kind of an idea of what staff's looking at before we initiate a general plan, and we'll also do that with council. And then we'll go back to the public noticing and the formal process. But just to give you a heads up in case you want to think about other general plan items you may want to address. And that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the consent calendar. These items will be approved or denied on one vote. So Is there any commissioner that wishes to pull a consent calendar item?
I don't wish to pull the item, but I would, with everybody else's agreement of the commissioners, like to add a condition that per Leslie Dill's report request, that the posts on the porch that are now internal and the windows be documented prior to demolition. If we could add that as a condition, then I'm happy with it being on consent with no discussion.
Okay. Are commissioners in agreement with that recommendation? I want to make sure, is the applicant here, and do they are in agreement? Or do you wish to pull that item to speak to that?
Hi, I'm Susan D. Cummins,
Good
the
evening.
building designer. So we're talking about making the windows to the historical review, correct? Is that it?
Just taking photographs of the existing windows inside and the porch posts that are inside the building now.
Okay.
Before you demolish them, just
And you want that? Okay,
taking photographs and then providing those to the Capitola Museum.
okay, we can do that. All right.
All right, thank you.
Is there anything else? Should I stay up here?
Yeah, yeah. Don't ask. So we'll make, as one of the added conditions will be the one that Linda mentioned. With that, now I think I'm going to call a separate vote on item 4A, and we'll deal with item 4B separately to handle the recusals. So is there a motion to approve
I'll
item
move
4A?
4A
Okay,
with the condition added.
I'll second it.
so motion and a second. Any further discussions? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Now, going to item 4B, we have two recusals, and this is just because two of us live too close to this property and to be able to vote on it under state law. So that's Commissioner Welch and myself. So maybe one of the other commissioners could take over and
Right. So this is an item at 510 El Salto Drive, a request for a one-year extension. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to pull this item, or any member of the commission?
I would move approval.
All right, I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So it passes.
Thank you. I'm back. So now we'll move on to public hearings for the evening. Thank you, Vice Chair. The first item, 5A, is 332 Riverview Avenue. This is a design permit for a third-story addition and garage remodel in the Central Village zoning district.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm going to have to recuse myself due to owning property
Oh,
nearby.
okay. So we'll wait till Commissioner Newman exits the room. So continuing on, 332 Riverview Avenue, can we begin with a staff report?
Yes, Chairman Story. 332 Riverview Avenue. The applicant is proposing a third-story addition and remodel of the first story to an existing single-family residence located in the Central Village zoning district. The existing structure was built in 1976 as a single unit that has a shared wall with an adjacent residential property to the north, 334 Riverview Avenue. On March 2nd, 2017, the Planning Commission approved a 33-square-foot addition for an enclosed staircase leading to the rooftop deck. Since that approval, the applicant has decided that they would prefer additional enclosed living space on the third story. The current application includes a 406-square-foot addition on the third story. The existing structure is non-conforming in terms of required on-site parking and landscaped open space. There are 2 on-site parking spaces currently within the garage, but the home has a floor area of 2,140 square feet and requires 3 on-site spaces. The addition of a third-story living space results in an extra 214 square feet of floor area 10% of floor area ratio. Pursuant to the Capitola Municipal
Yeah,
Code.
hold on.
Yeah.
Just a minute. Oh, you're going to listen in, Ed?
Yes.
Okay.
It's on television all over the city, I don't.
Okay, so pursuant to the Capitola Municipal Code, parking is not required to come into compliance because the addition does not exceed 10% of the existing floor area of the home. That's shown on the slide on the left, by the way. Slide on the right, the existing landscaped open space on the site is 56 square feet, approximately half of the 10% code requirement of 111 square feet. The remaining open space around the home is within a 2-foot strip along the rear property line and a 2.5-foot wide side yard on the south side. Neither of these narrow spaces is conducive to landscaping. The code allows nonconforming structures to continue as long as the alterations to the nonconforming structure do not exceed 80% of the present fair market value of the structure. Based on the construction cost formula in the Capitola Municipal Code, section 1772070, the valuation of the 406 square foot addition is 39% of the fair market value, which is well under the 80% allowed for structural alterations to nonconforming structures. The home was designed with a rooftop deck that is accessed from an internal ship's ladder and latched skylight, shown on the left. The new third-story addition will add 406 square feet of living space and keep 179 square feet of decking on the third story. As you can see on the right-hand side, the living space extends out to the back of the property from where the existing deck was. 332 Riverview Drive is located in the Riverview Historic District. The area is a mix of historic beach cottages and newer single-family homes. Riverview Avenue is between Capitola Avenue and Soquel Creek. The avenue is very narrow, with structures built right to the street and limited street parking. The development pattern is tight, with little to no setbacks between structures on the east side. The homes on the west side of the street are on larger lots with open space between the Riverview Pathway and the Soquel Creek. The subject property is located on the east side of the street near the trestle. The proposed third-story addition fits in with the surroundings, as most residences on the same side of the street have either third-story decks, high second-story ceilings, or third-story living space. I walked around and took pictures of a couple of the examples. Some have small structures in the middle of the third story. Some have simply higher ceilings. There's some very creative architecture around there. And then I took one from the back, looking down the alley as well, so you can see that the 2 stories are up front, and then as you look farther down the alley, you can see the varied third-story structures in the back. Therefore, with the third-story addition, the structure will be comparable in height to neighboring structures. The structure shares a wall with 334 Riverview Avenue to the north, indicated by the dotted red line, and there's a 3-foot setback from the neighbor to the south. The third story is designed to step in on the south side, resulting in a 7-foot setback from the property line on the third story, so there are no shading issues. The addition is also designed with limited or no windows on the north, south, and east elevations to protect the privacy of neighboring properties. It's also designed on the north side with the expectation that there might be a third story on 334 in the future. So, the applicant is proposing to replace the existing horizontal siding and shingles with stone on the first story and the exterior of the 2-story stairwell, and stucco siding on the rest of the second and third story. The home is not historic. The proposed addition is modest in size and blends in well with the existing home. So staff recommends approval of application 170309 for the third-story addition to the single-family home based on the findings and conditions of approval.
Thank you for that. Staff report, are there commissioner questions? Hearing none? Okay, I'll open it up to the public then. Does the applicant wish to make a presentation? Seeing none, I'll close the microphone and bring it back up for commission discussion and action.
I don't have any difficulties with the project. I think it'll be a nice improvement to what's there, sort of updating the existing house. I just had one question for staff, and I was a bit curious why the downstairs bedroom is now going to be a storage room. I mean, were we trying to get around some square footage issues, or? Because it seems like it makes quite a nice adequate bedroom.
So the square footage would be counted the same within this proposal. So actually, it was one item that we'll discuss further with the applicant. They're almost better off keeping a bedroom down there for floodplain reasons.
Right.
Once they convert it to storage, it can't be converted back.
Right.
But that was in their plans and part of their plan. So we'll discuss that further with them and ensure that when they get to building stage that they want to make that change.
Thank you.
Okay, any other?
I just have a
Comments?
couple of comments. I had difficulty with these plans, the way that they were laid out. It wasn't easy to figure out what was changing, comparing the new and the old. So that's just more an input for staff. I had a hard time ferreting my way through this one. The garage remodel is, as I understand it, the only thing about the garage that's being remodeled is that bedroom turning into a storage room, and I wouldn't really consider that part of the garage. But having noted the garage remodel in the description, I went looking for it because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't getting any smaller, since it only parks 2 cars. In expanding the rooftop deck area would normally lead me to look at it as making a crowded space even more crowded. But when you look at the configuration and when you go to Google Earth and you look down on it, I don't think that expanding the living space into the back is gonna have any adverse effects around. So the only comment that I would like to have added is a condition that there can't ever be additional rooftop deck. Because we've had in the past a skylight that accessed a rooftop deck, and now you've got a new flat roof with a skylight, if we can just make it really clear that if they're looking at it 25 years from now, they can't say we had access to that rooftop deck. Other than that, I could support the project.
Commissioner Smith, I think the best we could do would be to put a condition on there that any expansion of the deck would require planning commission approval. I think a property owner would have the right to apply for it, even if we said you can't do it.
Right, right.
So if that would satisfy you, we could easily do that.
If that prevents that skylight from being an operable skylight that would let people pass through it, then yes, that would.
So you're concerned about the 3rd-story roof becoming a deck.
That's access through that
Right.
skylight.
So we would just make it clear that if they wanted to convert roof on the 3rd floor to a new deck, it would have to come to the planning commission.
Understood, sure.
You did?
No, I don't have issues with it. I think it's nice they worked within the system of our ordinance and is going to make it a nicer place to look at. And it's nice to see that Riverview get cleaned up in a slow, long, over a period of time. But I think it's going to add to that street. So I think it's a nice job.
Right. Thank you. And for my comments, I mean, this project is in compliance with all our zoning requirements. And it will be a nice improvement. I did have maybe a couple of questions. One is concerning the actual construction. And it looks like it would be quite extensive. How are they going to handle that on Riverview? Are they going to have to block the street?
They'll have to work with our public works and go through exactly what process it'll be for managing the street during construction.
Right. Well, I think there should just be appropriate notice to the neighbors about when that's going to happen and to the extent of how much it may actually block access or the throughway in that area and for how long. Hopefully the staff can monitor that and make sure it won't be too much of a burden on traffic going through and hopefully limiting the amount of time when that should occur. The other is the non-conforming landscaping requirement. And I was just thinking whether, and I know that there's not adequate space to provide for 111 square feet, but would planter boxes qualify to add additional landscaping?
Along Riverview, along the street?
Yes.
Yeah, on other projects, we have required, landscape plans have come in with planter boxes before, so you could, if you'd like to see more planter boxes, you could request them as a condition.
Well, and if, and I don't want to get into the, because I'm not sure, how feasible they would be, okay, and whether they would cantilever, but I would, hopefully the applicant and the staff could look at that and consider it, and if that's a workable addition for landscaping, that be incorporated into the project. So those are my thoughts. Are there, yeah, TJ?
No, I'm done. I was just ready to move forward.
Oh, move forward, go for it, yes.
Well, I would make a motion we adopt as outlined with the one comment about the, making sure that the third-story roof does not become a deck at some point.
Okay, any other? That was a motion?
That was a
That was a
motion.
motion, I'm sorry.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. So all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
As I mentioned, I have to recuse myself for the next item, so I'll see you all at our next planning commission meeting.
Susan,
All right,
just so
good
you
night,
know,
Susan.
I'll say this at the end, I won't be here in February, but
Okay,
I'll see you again in March.
all righty.
So the next item is, on our public hearing, is item 5B, which is 1810 Wharf Road. This is a design permit, conditional use permit, and coastal development permit for an addition to a historic single-family residence with a variance to the front yard setbacks for a new detached garage with an accessory dwelling unit above an additional height for a recreated historical water tower. It's all located in the single-family automatic review zoning district. We'll start with a staff report.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Story, and good evening, Commissioners. Before you this evening is an addition to a single-family home at 1810 Wharf Road. This project came in at the very beginning of 2017 when it was purchased by a new owner, and initially we sent out for a historic review of the property to really assess how old is this property and what are the character-defining features of the home. Following that, this past summer, late summer, an application came in. I should say, after the historic review was done, the architectural historian Leslie Dill gave advice to the designer Derek Van Alstine on exactly where an addition would be appropriate on this historic home. It is one of the oldest, we think maybe the oldest, single-family home in Capitola, and so it goes back a ways. So really, there's been a lot of oversight in this application with the contracted architectural historian, and essential to the project was preserving the original T-shaped cottage. And modifications have occurred to the rear of the building over time, but a lot of the original materials are there, the board and bat siding, and the architectural historian's advice was to keep the form of the original building and then to place the addition off the back and possibly within a detached structure. So this is really the outcome of this. The design was really a result of those early conversations on how to preserve the original structure. So with that, I'll give you an overview of the project. 1810 Wharf Road backs up to the Soquel Creek. As you know, there's a riparian corridor there and a requirement that there's 30-foot setback from the riparian corridor. The applicant has placed a new addition off the back of the home, so they've really maintained the original roof lines of the structure and the additions off the back, as well as a new detached garage and a second story on top of the detached garage that has a secondary dwelling unit. So this is the front elevation of the home. One feature of the home that originally existed was a water tower that was removed. The applicant is proposing through photo documentation to bring that architectural feature back. They're requesting a variance up to 31 feet. Under the code, you're allowed up to 27 feet for, in height for a historic, to match historic elements. So they're asking for a 4-foot variance from that 27-foot exception. And then here is the secondary dwelling unit that's proposed above the garage. These are the side elevations of the project. So here I highlighted in yellow the areas of the new additions. So you can see they've really tried to keep off the front of the structure and place the new additions on the back. And then the rear elevation is the elevation that will change the most in this development. So really there is minor characteristics within the water tower on the first 2 stories that would be from the original home, but otherwise it's really replacing the whole back of the home, and then of course the new garage with secondary unit on top. The parking, this evening, our original staff recommendation was to move approval. At the last minute, there was a change to the parking configuration on this property. We're actually, this evening, we talked about possibly taking this off the agenda. We decided it'd be better to get feedback on this application this evening, and staff were going to recommend this be continued because of the parking. A new spot was created at the south end of the property, and as you'll see here, by creating a new spot on the south end of the property, it's going to eliminate 1 on-street parking space. And in this area, it's in the coastal zone. It is an area that's utilized for parking quite frequently, and it doesn't make sense when you have such a large lot to be taking off a parking space on the street. It should really be incorporated into the site planning and design. So with that, you can see the home is over 4,000 square feet, and they're required 1 covered space and 3 uncovered. The current application has 2 tandem spaces within the garage, 1 space in front of the garage, and then of course the space that was placed at the south end of the property. There are different design things in terms of the garage. They're only required 1 covered space, so maybe shortening the garage to get the 3 uncovered spaces, but changes could be made to this site plan to accommodate the on-site parking requirement without taking off that space. And in speaking with the applicant about this today, they would really like to get feedback on the overall design. So I'm going to continue to go through the design, some of the challenges that are there, what they're proposing in terms of variance, and then wrap it up at the end with a few questions for direction, okay? So the variance, there are 3 variances within this application. The first is for the height of the water tower, as I previously mentioned, up to 31 feet. The second is the overall development exceeds the 80% maximum nonconforming calculation, so requesting a variance to that. And then the setback for the detached garage is required to be 40 feet, and it's currently at 18 feet. The first 2 variants, the height of the water tower and the 80% non-conforming calculation, these really have to do with historic preservation. And the water tower is reintroducing a historic element that once existed. The 80% non-conforming calculation, the front of the home sits a foot over the property line. In allowing the home to stay in its location, it's really preserving the site, the original site and layout of this property. So a variance would be supported by staff for the height of the water tower and the 80% non-conforming in order to, for historic preservation purposes, and to set forth the goals that are within our general plan. The third request is a variance to the location of the garage. This is a unique site in that it has a very steep slope off the back. So the requirement for a detached structure is 40 feet from the front property line. And essentially by requiring that 40-foot setback, it would be very difficult to have a detached garage on this site. And so due to the steep slope, we thought that the variance could be supported because of the existing conditions of the site. And it would not be perceived as as giving them something that is not, that other people in the direct neighborhood are experiencing under the same zoning. All along Wharf Road, the homes are closer to the street because of the steep slopes that go down to the Soquel Creek behind. And now I'll go into the secondary dwelling unit. The secondary dwelling unit is a 2-story element, board and bat. First story is garage, second story is the secondary dwelling unit, and as you can see, there's a deck proposed off the back of the unit. The current code for a secondary dwelling unit, it's limited to a single story and not taller than 15 feet. The front yard setback would be the same as the primary structure, which on the second story would be 20 feet. Side yard setback of 5 feet and a rear yard of 8, so they're exceeding the single-story height. This evening, in the staff report, we raised that the Planning Commission can either require a redesign to remove the detached second story because it's not allowed under the current code, or as you know, there's been recent legislation updating the secondary dwelling ordinances requirements from the state level, and our current code is out of date and not in compliance with the state regulations. The new code is about to be adopted next week, but then it's going to have to go through the coastal process, so we're probably at least a year out from this taking effect. So the Planning Commission could also direct staff to make a finding that the city's current regulations are overly restrictive and therefore inconsistent with state law, and at that we could apply the draft standards that we have because of it being inconsistent with state law. So under the future code, you'd be allowed 2 stories up to 22 feet. The front yard is, the front, side, and rear yard standards are, well, front and side are the same, and then the rear yard, there's a 10-foot setback requirement, which this well exceeds. I think it's about 80 feet from the setback of the rear yard. The applicant, at the request of the neighbor, put up the scaffolding that you're seeing on the image, and this shows at the far edge of the second of the garage what it would look like, the massing, so you can see actually the roof, how it would be shaped, but this would extend closer to the road. But just to give you an idea of the massing that they're proposing and what a second story would look like, the water tower with the 31-foot element would be higher on the right, so it actually, the building to the right would be larger. And this is the windows of the neighboring property, just to see how that relates. So staff is recommending a continuation to the March 1st, 2018 meeting so that the applicant can revise the on-site parking and not impact the street parking. And we're also requesting that the Planning Commission provide the applicant direction on the proposal, specifically like direction on parking, the variance requests, and also the secondary dwelling unit, if they should require a redesign without a secondary dwelling unit, or support making findings about the city's current regulations. And then fourth, they'd like to hear more, there was a condition by the historian that they would like to see, the historian recommended that the home be preserved in place and the walls stay in place while they're doing doing the addition. The applicant, I'll let speak to that this evening of the what they're projecting in terms of having to replace walls and exterior materials, but they'd like to get some input on whether or not a reconstruction project would be acceptable, where you actually take down the walls and place materials back onto the walls, or if it needs to be preserved in place. So with that, I'm available for any questions.
Other questions?
If I could, I just want to clarify, the height allowable would be 27 feet and not 25 feet, right?
Correct. So the zone height is 25 feet, but there's an exception for historic structures up to 27.
Thank you.
Any other questions, TJ, Ed? Could I get clarification about, on item 3, the second bullet? a finding that the city's regulations concerning the second story and the ADU is overly restrictive. But then it says therefore inconsistent with state law. So it would seem, if that's the case, then how could we enforce not, are you saying that the state law allows them to have a second story?
So,
It does, and it's just our,
not necessarily. So the state code passed legislation last year, as I think we've discussed when we were going through the zoning code update, that significantly relaxed development standards for ADUs to promote development of more affordable housing. As part of that, agencies throughout the state are required to relax their own ordinances and standards, and we've done that through the zoning code update. You and the city council have relaxed standards to a great deal on secondary dwelling units, including the provision to allow a second story unit. The ordinance today does not allow it, but when we were talking with the city attorney's office about, for example, the lot size requirements, could we keep a minimum 5,000 square foot lot size, or would they be too restrictive? They said, well, let's take a look at how many lots you have, and so we did a lot of analysis on that to determine, well, does this allow enough development potential of ADUs? The city attorney was satisfied that they did. We didn't specifically look at the 1 versus 2 story difference, but I think it would be reasonable if this commission said, well, we've already relaxed our standards, they're just not adopted yet. The state has told us to relax standards, and so this would be keeping it with state law. And I would compare it to our old wireless ordinance. As you recall, our old wireless ordinance didn't allow wireless facilities, I think it was within 2,000 feet of the coast. And that was in conflict with federal law. And for a long time, we sort of ignored that because we knew it just wasn't compliant until we got sued and had to change it. So I think this is somewhat similar in that we have state law that trumps local ordinance. We're in the process of updating it. And so I think the commission does have some discretion to say yes or no to a second story based on that. I don't think you're required to, but I think you have that opportunity.
okay, so we wouldn't necessarily be in violation of state law if we were to deny the second story.
No, not necessarily. There's nothing in the state law that says you must allow the second stories. You just must allow enough opportunities to advance affordable housing goals. And I think we can make that case either way.
Okay. You know, I was thinking maybe there's 4 points up there that I think that maybe staff and the applicant are looking for direction on. Maybe we could take each one in order, starting with the parking issue. Yes.
Should we have the public hearing? I was going to address that same issue, but I thought I'd
Okay.
wait till after the public hearing.
Oh, good point. Thank you. Well, maybe I'll open it up to the public now, if the applicant wants to make a presentation and maybe speaking to these 4 points that.
Good evening, new chairman, commissioners. Thank you. I'm Derek Van Alstyne. I'm the designer of this project. And where to start? This is a very complex project. This isn't the first historical project we've done in the city of Capitola. We've done 2 on Central, both of which started out as remodels and ended up being taken apart stick by stick because of the condition of the buildings and completely rebuilt. In the first case, 119 Central, once we got into that project, the building was so far gone that the building inspector said, "I'm going to red tag it right now. We need to get out of here." He didn't like standing in the building. But what we did with that was we were able to catalog it. We cataloged all the pieces. We took everything that could be saved, and I think that was a very successful project that speaks well to what can be done if you set your mind to it. We can keep that sense of place in history, and we can keep this feeling from the street being the same, and still end up with a building that's well built and will withstand earthquakes and be up to current standards. The same was true with 124 Central across the street, which was structurally a mess. It was very difficult to deal with. The front of that building, I think, speaks to what can be done. It was very nicely replicated, I think. And it has the same sense of place that it did before, except that it's new. Another one was the house that we did on Fairview, the second house in on Fairview, which was 12 feet wide and 84 feet long. That was also a complete tear down and rebuild. But it totally replicated the house that was there, down to the pieces of wood on the gable ends. And then lastly, 124 Central, excuse me, not 124 Central, 429 Riverview, the one we're finishing right now, which for the most part was new. We had to rebuild it from the inside out, but when we got to the siding, it became a problem because it's almost impossible to waterproof it from the inside out. In fact, it's technically impossible to do. So we find ourselves looking at this project, and this house is 165 years old. It's a wooden structure that's way past its useful lifetime. We're absolutely willing to take it apart and put it back together again. But in order to do it properly and to waterproof it and have it be a viable solution, it really needs to be taken apart, cataloged, and put back together the same way the other ones have. It's ludicrous to think you can do otherwise. Even though we started out the buildings on Central with being able to do that in mind, that's not what ended up happening eventually, and it's a tough road to hoe. The historic portion of this property is what drives everything about it. The addition to the house is actually fairly modest. The floor area ratio is allowed to be 60%. We're asking for half of that. We could easily accommodate that if we didn't have the historic placement of the house to deal with, and we also have a tree that's in the way of the driveway in front of the garage. So that almost precludes getting that fourth parking space in, which is how we came up with the solution of the single space on the south side. So if this were not historic, and we've bent over backwards to try and keep it as original as possible, while doing this modest remodel to the main house, most of which can't be seen from the street, and recreating the water tower, which brings it back into historical focus. And we've pulled the garage and the second unit, which is really an adjunct to the square footage in the house. So if we were building new and from scratch and without the historical element, we would be able to easily accommodate that square footage and the garage and do so in a very nice fashion. So with that being said, I think that we would appreciate some direction, but most of all, I think what I'm asking for is for you to very carefully weigh what's being done here. I mean, this is it's a long, very expensive process for my clients, and they've actually been really wonderful and accommodating in making sure that we get the historical portion correct. And in order to do that, that's how we came up with the ADU and the garage and the other parking space. The fourth parking space could easily be dealt with, I think, by deleting that parking space. You'd have another space on the street, and although there technically isn't an additional space in front of the garage, most probably by Capitola standards, you could squeeze two cars in, but not as required by ordinance. So that's it. I'd be glad to answer any questions I might have.
Thank you, Derek. Questions from commissioners?
I have, excuse me, I have two. The water tower. The height of the water tower Is it possible to do architecturally a good job with the water tower at a lower height than 31 feet?
Yes, but it wouldn't be historically correct.
So the photograph, I've seen two photographs that include the water tower.
Right.
And those photographs are clear enough that they dictate a 31-foot.
You can scale the windows. So what we did was we actually downloaded it into the computer and scaled it out and scaled the windows out and blew it up and scaled it out. So we can figure, I mean, I think it's actually within inches of where it was originally.
Okay, the reason that I ask is the Lent property has a water tower similar. And it was still standing, so they had a really good idea exactly
Right.
its height. But it's only 28 feet high, it's not 31 feet.
Yep.
When I look at the massing of 7 feet in addition to what's marked out there now as the top of the ADU, that's a pretty massive water tower.
Well, I think in context, when you see it built, I don't know that you're gonna see it that way. Because there's a lot of mass to the existing house. And either from the front or from the rear, and from the rear, what you see is from across the river, so it's a ways away. I don't think you get the same perception of the building and the massing of the building from across the creek as you do from the street. From the street, you're gonna see the massing of the house, and the garage and the water tower, and I think it's all gonna actually look, quite nice together. And I think it did have some, it must have had a lot of presence originally.
Do you know what the ceiling heights will be inside that third story on the water tower?
I don't, but I could probably tell you. It's around 7 feet. It might even be 6'8". So
Okay.
it's not
They're not tall.
exceptionally tall.
Okay.
No.
I'm not an architect, and when I look at plans, sometimes I have a hard time picturing things in three dimensions, so
yeah.
I appreciate that. The other question on the ADU, the height of the garage ADU unit is 23 feet?
No, it's 20,
23 feet, 8 inches.
23 feet, 8
23 feet,
inches. Thank you.
okay. Okay.
And to answer to anticipate your next question, could it be brought down to 22 feet? Yeah, probably.
Okay. I was gonna be a comment, not a question, but thank you. I don't have any more questions.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners with questions? Yeah, Ed?
So this might be more for the owner, but I don't know if the owner's planning to speak, so maybe you can help me with this.
I'll do my best.
I'm going to speak to the point number 3, second dot, that Commissioner Story brought up later, but one of the alternatives is to wait and do the ADU when the new code section is finalized. And how is that as an alternative for the owner?
I don't think it's a realistic option. I would encourage you to look at it as part of the historic portion and say, as a result of having to facilitate everything within the existing T-shaped structure, that the only way to get any additional space other than what we put out the back, which is modest, was to do it over the garage. So, I mean,
In best case, when would the owner begin the project?
well, that all depends on you.
Well, let's say,
So, if,
you're approved sometime in February, is he gonna start up the project right away?
I would think so if we had, as soon as we had building permits, we would start.
And how long will the project take?
It'll be a year. So, yes, that is a possibility. Yes, that is a possibility. That's possibly what it'd take her, yeah.
I just thought of one more question, if you don't mind me double dipping
Go
here. Can you put the slide back up with the part that shows the parking? Because it's my understanding that one of the reasons that it's staff's recommendation that we continue this item is to allow you guys to come back with a different parking scheme. And I'm just wondering what that might be.
We've circled the wagon around that a number of times from the beginning of this project. The problem is that there's a huge tree out in front of a garage, and the neighbors don't want to lose any of that on-street parking. So there's not enough room to get around the tree and then park in any other position other than 3 in tandem. So it makes it very difficult, which is why we showed it as being on the south side, and creating a new entry, essentially. I think they'd rather not have that happen, but finding another solution is very difficult. Because of the historical aspect, there wasn't any other place where we could add on to the front of the property or to the side, and Leslie Dill specifically set that portion of the parcel aside and said, if you build over here, even if you build 2 stories, it's fine because it doesn't obstruct the view of the original structure.
So right now, what I'm seeing here are 2 covered and 1 uncovered spot.
Correct.
Yes.
There were photographs that we looked at earlier that showed, I believe, a small RV and a car parked on this side of the property behind the fence, so it would not interrupt any on-street parking. Is that an option, or are you telling me that trees blocks that from really being there?
Once the garage is built, the tree blocks it.
And there's no way to make the garage, to configure the garage so that you could pull in and around that tree into that space off to the right, where you can see the front end of a car now?
Well, then we get into another issue. So we've designed the garage so that we've pulled it back as far as we can towards the street to allow the neighbor to have a line of sight view out of the back of her house towards the ocean. And she'd like to speak to that as well. So, that's why we erected the scaffolding today, so she could see exactly, as close as we could do, where the rear of that garage is gonna be and where the deck was gonna be. So, yes, of course, we could push it back, but then her view would be blocked. So,
How far forward does it come now? The scaffolding stuff doesn't really show how close to the road it comes?
no, it's 18 feet to the garage door from the property corner, which is essentially right at the corner of the fence.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Smith, too, if I may clarify, I think at least my concern more with continuing it is there was no mention in the staff report, the noticing, that there might be a loss of an on-street parking space. And so I felt we had to go out for public disclosure and let that be known.
Yeah, of course.
Chair, I have just one quick question. Derek, do we know who the contractor is?
No, not yet.
Anything further? Ed, you can? Okay.
Thank you.
Could we, thank you, Mr. Alstead. Can we go back to the story poles the scaffolding that was put up? And so I understand that just went up today?
It went up yesterday afternoon, and then they put up the ridge this morning. Oh, yeah, and the deck. I didn't realize the deck.
Yeah, I drove by it twice today, and early, it wasn't complete the way it is now, and later when I went back by it, they'd added to it, so it was an all-day kind of a thing.
And I believe we have one more member of the public that would like
That
to
wants to
speak
speak
on
up,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, why don't you come on up? Yeah, please do.
I'm Joanne Kissling, and I'm the next-door neighbor, and you can see my house there on the left. And I've emailed you and sent pictures, and I had to wait until the scaffolding was up. I thought yesterday's scaffolding was all we were gonna have, so it came in a couple of pieces. But I just want to recap what I said in email, which is, I think it's fabulous that this historic home is going to get restored, and that, you know, a really long neglected home is going to become a nice place to be again. So that's all goodness. The only thing is that the ADU at 2 stories is going to run the entire length of my house and be just basically a solid wall blocking light and view, that's currently there. And the deck off the back also, and then it also blocks some of the view to the ocean, and the deck especially. So, I mean, personally, it would be great to not have a second story on it, but I understand all the issues that Derek has put forth, and you know, so I understand the pressure that Ben and Marta, the owners, are under, you know, to get the most out of the property with the constraints that they're under. So, but having said that, you know, the view blockage just feels excessive. I sent you photographs so you could see and compare. I didn't know that we could submit them for show here, or I would have been able to put that here for you. But, you know, my desire is if there is to be this two-story unit, that at least the deck could maybe be moved to the front. I don't know. It's hard for me to visualize because the scaffolding is only partial. But, you know, to do something about the deck, to have translucent glass on the north-facing side, which is what I've done on my north-facing side, because the light comes in from the south. Typically, that's, you know, that's the big issue. Also, ideally, if the tower goes to 3 stories and has the windows on it that are proposed, you know, it'd be nice to have translucent glass there as well. And especially my fear is that this ADU become a rental unit, or a vacation rental unit, or an Airbnb or something like that, where you're going to have partying on that deck, and it's right outside the master bedroom of my house. So that's really the crux of what I'm suggesting, although there may be other creative options here, and I'm open to negotiating that. I did want to mention something. Someone said that the scaffolding was put up at my request, but actually Ben and Derek had offered that last summer, but then it got, you know, this all kind of came together, like I didn't even see the plans till Friday. So I just wanted to say that we've been trying to work together on this. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I had a question.
Oh,
for
questions,
Ms.
yeah.
Kissling. Am I recalling correctly that your house was remodeled a few years ago?
Well, this unit was built in 2008 and 9. So the property was bought by my ex-husband, Niels Kissling's family in 71. And there was, you know, the older home, which is still at 1820. And then there was what we thought was a backyard, but come to find out after we purchased that the lot had been divided in the 70s by his father, who had since passed away. And before we bought the property from him.
My question was kind of a
Sorry.
little more simpler. Was your house, wasn't it, you came in for a permit a few years ago to redevelop that property?
To develop, yes. It's a new build.
Okay, and you got a floor area ratio variance, didn't you?
Well, I was asking Niels about this. He said the only variance that we got was the request, as, you know, as
Yeah, no,
we've
I
talked
remember
about,
that
to move
hearing,
it
and,
forward on the lot.
Yeah, I'd like, I suppose I could do this myself, but if the staff could do it faster than I could before the next hearing, to just take a look at that hearing, because I recall that I had difficulty with that particular variance, which was different from what most people are allowed to build on their property,
Uh-huh,
and
okay.
was more, and so that might be of some interest depending on where this goes.
Okay. Any other?
Anything further?
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public portion. I will bring it back to commissioners for direction to staff and the applicant for the next. Will this be coming back at the next meeting? That sounds awfully rushed.
No, March 1st is what we're requesting, because
March
the next
1st.
meeting's only 2 weeks away, and we need to notice it correctly in the paper.
Mr. Chair, I liked your idea initially before the public hearing, that we kind of go through those bullets one at a time, maybe?
Yes, yeah, I thought we would do that, and not to preclude if commissioners have other items, okay, that they want to reference, but let's start with the request for the parking variance, and I think I want to assure, well, the public and the applicant that nothing that we say here tonight is going to, I think, bind us. These are just guidance. And that the final decisions will come at the March 1st and will be subject to other input, other testimony, and other information that we may receive at that time. So with that, if commissioners have comments on the parking item?
Yeah, my initial reaction to this new parking space is that it's shooting ourselves in the foot here. We're basically taking away a public parking space on the street and giving it to the property to use. I would rather see a variance to 3 parking spaces than do that.
Yeah. Any other comments on that item?
I would agree. I'd rather not see us, I'd rather see looking towards a variance as opposed to, or another option on the property, you know, some way of getting around that tree. There's a lot of room towards the front of that house, so.
I hate giving variances for parking, but I have to agree. And if you put that thing, your slide back up there, I think that I was, earlier when I said I see 3 parking places, I did not see the 4th parking place. And it is at the other end, so that's where the street parking goes away. It doesn't go away up by the tree, because that's landscaping in front of there. Okay.
Yeah, and I think I would concur with the statements being made about parking. But however, if there is going to be a variance, I would want to be assured that it meets the criteria of a variance without being a special privilege. So there has to be the demonstrated findings for a variance. Otherwise, the parking should be located on the site. Anything further on that item? Then we'll go to item number 2, which is the water tower height.
I'm usually the first one to jump up and down and say that historic, preserving or restoring a historic characteristic is really a great thing to do. In this case, I read Leslie's early reports, and it was feeling to me like the water tower wasn't part of the original structure. It was there at some point, and then it was hyphenated in. It kind of got built in, and the 3rd story hasn't been there for so long that my concern over the height of 31 feet weighs heavier on me than the value of having the historic element there. The Lent property is right across the street from me. Their water tower is a large characteristic on the street. There are a lot of people that had issues with it. I think it's beautiful, but it's significantly shorter. And it works. So I would just ask that you go back and look at that and see what makes sense, if anything lower makes sense. I'm not saying that I couldn't support if it doesn't change, but I'd really like for it to be smaller. We've had a couple of different neighbors' inputs on the height issue, so that concerns me.
Any other comments? CJ?
I think the height actually adds to the massing and makes it a more attractive part of the structure and stands out as what it is, as a water tower, not something that's kind of built like a water tower attached to the house myself. And I don't know that the massing really takes away from any view shed or lighting from other properties. I think it's located in a place that makes it a great place to do that. And given the fact that this is, so I guess, they're guessing one of the oldest dwellings in the city, I think it'd be nice to try to get back to as original as we can and have that. I think it would be a nice addition to the structure overall.
Ed, do you have any comments on that? Okay. I think my thoughts, I have some concern about the height and the variance based being 4 feet over the limit. However, I understand trying to bring back and preserve historical elements. When this comes back, I think I would like to be assured that this is a true representation of the original historical water tower that was there. It's kind of hard to tell. There are photos in the agenda packet, but it's hard to get a sense of what were the specifications as discerned from the photos and the calculations that were done to support that particular historical variance. So I just think I would like to see more evidence if we're being asked to go in that direction, that it is verified and to support the variance request. And I'll just put out there now that I do have concerns about the overall massing of the front and with the combination of the water tower and now, but then also going to the next item, which maybe we can deal with. And I'll maybe just to lead in with that, I am having great difficulty with the second story ADU. I don't see the justification for a variance if that's what's being asked for here, for why that needs to be the case. So I would like to see that maybe brought back and more focus put on the reasons for that particular variance. With that, I'll ask if other commissioners have comments on and guidance on item number 3.
So I do. I like the concept, the substance of the proposal as to the ADU and the second story ADU, and we can deal with some of the issues as to how it affects the neighbor, perhaps. I'm uncomfortable with the proposed process here of our declaring our ordinance inconsistent with state law, therefore we have no ordinance and we can do whatever we want. It just seems like a slippery slope to me. It seems like it's beyond our pay grade. And that's why I wondered if the other alternative of waiting, we have a lot of provisions of our proposed zoning code that are different from our current code, that people come in and they're having to comply with our current code. And are we going to start going down the road now of saying that, well, there's a new code coming up and there's some state laws and so forth? And I just don't think we should start doing that. And if we can avoid it and still get this built, I think it would be great.
Commissioner Newman, I can assure you that's not going to be staff's perspective. This was a rather unique case in that we did have kind of a competing state legislation in place and an ordinance amendment that wasn't going to be effectuated. And I think the reality is that the zoning code update probably won't go into effect in the coastal zone for years. I think 1 year is overly optimistic. So there is going to be a stretch of time. And I would also add that I think the applicant initially approached us with a variance request. And I felt very strongly that a variance was an inappropriate process to lift a prohibition. Because our code makes it very clear that second story ADUs are not allowed. And I just didn't think a variance was a proper procedure for that.
If we take the position that there's state law encourages ADUs and our code is restrictive as to ADUs, there is no end to that argument, basically. Every ADU application can make that same point, regardless of what provision they don't comply with. And well, anyway, I don't mean to argue with you, but
No, I totally understand your position. I think this was sort of a creative interpretation by staff to say, well, here's one way where the commission can approve it because we don't think a variance is appropriate. A rezone isn't possible in this case.
Yeah.
So as one way for the council or the planning commission to consider it. And I would also add, I think we have 3 other applicants either in process or have been asking us for second story ADU. So it's something that we did kind of want to get a read from the commission. Is this something that you would entertain? Because we have a lot of people that are banging on our doors asking for them.
is there any way to just amend that portion of our, just the second story provision so it goes through more quickly than the whole code amendment?
Potentially, it's going to be tricky, though. So we got, 15 chapters or whatever in our new zoning code, and which pieces would we want to take out and try to accelerate? Would it be the ADUs, or are there other components? We are going to have discussions with the Coastal Commission about kind of doing a stage certification. I don't know how receptive they'll be, but this would certainly be a chapter that we would bundle up with kind of the more routine, mundane chapters of our code.
Thank you.
And our code prohibits a two-story ADU or a second-story ADU? Because I know of several that we have that are internal on the second level.
It allows a single-story detached ADU. So you can't have a detached two-story ADU.
For me, the secondary dwelling unit is an interesting one because I agree with everything that Commissioner Newman said. I also know what kind of struggles and what kind of thought we put into our new zoning code and how we really did look at the state law and what was going on and bring ourselves to be in compliance with those things. I have a really hard time even thinking about approving a second-story ADU that doesn't meet what would be our code coming forward. So the 22 feet would be a hard stop for me.
TJ?
Yeah, I agree that it's a stretch, and then once we make this exception, I like the way we developed our new code that adopts this concept of ADUs over a detached. I'm all in favor of it, but making exceptions now, it's like, then where do we start with our new code? Because there's all kinds of things in our new code that I'm excited about, and I think it's gonna help the city. So I'd be hesitant to find an exception there. I think the design is good. I think it goes well with the rest of the structure. I think it's a beautiful design. I think it's nice that they moved it as far forward as they could to allow the view shed and lighting for the neighbor. But I would agree with the commissioners on the rest of the as far as it not being on our current code, and the height I think we can work on, but.
I'm going to call this double dip night because I'm going to do it again. The other thing that I would comment on is the second floor deck. As we get more ADUs and they become living spaces, I think we need to be very, very careful about the second floor decks. And they need to be on the front of overlooking the street, overlooking a park, overlooking an empty place, and not, affecting the neighbors.
Okay, anything further on that item? Hearing none, let's move on to item number 4, reconstruction versus preservation.
I'm going to jump right in here again. Having lived through the Lent property and some of the other ones that Derek mentioned, I completely agree and support his position that it can be done so that you get the historical characteristic, you get your elements back, and you still have a good structure. Leslie's report and her requirement for that section 6 is for rehabilitation. Reconstruction allows you to do it differently, and I could totally support an organized, defined process of taking the siding down, cataloging it, labeling it, putting it back on the skin of, a well waterproofed and well-built building.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's one of the reasons I asked who the contractor was, because I think when you look at the property on Central and the church on Escalona, the contractor did a phenomenal job of doing the reconstruction, cataloging it. He was very analytical in the process, and I think he did a great job of doing that. But having said that, who knows who the contractor is going to be? Are they going to have that same knack for making sure that everything is cataloged so well and done in that magnitude?
I
So.
think in this case, you've got an architect who's going to stay involved enough to make sure that part of it happens.
So I'm persuaded by Derek. Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with that. I'll just comment that our awareness of history and our appreciation of history has really changed since I've been around. in our society, and some of you are newer here and don't realize, I mean, I could give examples of historic elements that nobody even paid any attention to 40 years ago or 50 years ago. It just wasn't, I mean, shopping centers were what it was all about then. And new shopping centers, you know, nobody paid any attention to history, and it's really great that that has changed, and we're more like a European country now and really cherishing our history, but that we can also go overboard at times, and the historians who are deeply involved in this can, you know, have the tendency, like any of us, to kind of not know where the stops are. And this is a good example.
Okay. With that, are there any other items on the project that commissioners would like to speak to? I had a few additional requests that I would like to add when this comes back. First, I had a question about the front fence, and what is the plan for that front fence? Is it staying? Is it being rebuilt, or?
The fence they'd like to rebuild, and we'll build that into the next staff report, asking for an exception at 6 feet in height along the
So there's
frontage.
going to be a variance for the front fence as well?
They'd like to ask for an exception to the fence height at 6 feet.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. So I would just caution that that should be, you know, very well justified. Also during this process, there's a reference came up to that this is a sidewalk exempt area.
Mhm.
When you bring this back, could you find out whatever historical references is to that designation by the council, you know, decades ago, and the justification for that? I would just like to determine whether if it's still relevant. Also, the condition says that the landscaping plan will come at a later date. I would like to see it when it comes back at the next meeting. And that's it. All right. Anything further staff feels that we need to give guidance on, or?
Yeah, I think if you'd like me to recap, I could, but it sounds like parking, either place it on site at the correct entrance or a variance could be considered. Water tower height, to kind of document exactly how you got to that height for support for that, or redesign to lower it. And then the secondary dwelling unit, it sounds like to require redesign without the second story element at this time. And so that would require one on-site covered parking space, and then they could come back at a later date once the secondary dwelling unit update is in place. And then reconstruction, documenting the boards and taking apart the building would be supported.
So I'll move that we continue this
Second?
March hearing.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to continue. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Next item is the director's report.
I don't have anything additional to
Already-
share with you this evening. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional commission communications?
The only thing that I want everybody to know is I will miss the February meeting. I'll be in Texas, so I'll think about you, but I won't be here.
Thank you. With that, I'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Commissioner Westman appears to have forgotten.
Oh, it's
her-
actually, that's mine.
Oh,
Yeah. In the shuffle, I left it behind.